The title for today's panel is Energy Sovereignty Policy Frameworks for Computational Independence. And I think the word compute is a pretty loaded term right now. So we're going to unpack that. Before we do, I was on a panel with Will in Nashville in January at the Nashville Energy and Mining Summit. And I think a lot has stayed the same and a lot has probably changed. So excited to dig into that. I'll let you all introduce yourselves first. Just tell us your names and what you're working on, and then we'll dive in.
I'm Justin Ballard. I have a lot of different hats I wear. I do stuff through my law firm, obviously J.E. Ballard Law. I've been in the space for several years on the mining side. Come from an energy background. I was in oil and gas. Started a mining company back in Wyoming, and then really got onto the on-grid side of things, and have really been primarily putting deals together with finding sites with capacity, securing the land, and then bringing in an off-taker. Mainly has been the Bitcoin miner world, but that's been changing over time, obviously, with the influx of the AI and HPC space. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Rod, for reaching out. And yeah, just I'm doing a lot of work with Arthur Mining too. I think they're in here. So yeah, I've kind of got a lot of different hats, but yeah, glad to be here again and see a lot of familiar faces.
Yeah, I'm Will Paul. I head up public policy for payments and hardware at Block. You probably know Block best as Square, Cash App, Afterpay in the US. We also, of course, have a strong Bitcoin first angle to our company. So we have Bitcoin mining, we have Proto, which is kind of changing the game for ASICs and rigs out there. So I spend a lot of time talking to legislators, regulators, explaining our story and helping them navigate the market. And yeah, similar. Thanks to Rod and the team putting this on, and also thanks to Johnny for lunch. And I could listen to a Texan speak about me all day long. So if we could get that on the agenda, please, that would be amazing.
Hey, everybody. My name is Giovanni Capriglione. I'm the president of the Texas Blockchain Council. We're located in Dallas, and we have over 100 members. And we spend a lot of our thank you. We spend a lot of time with some of your members that are here today, Riot and Proto and others, and Arthur. And those are folks that we help both legislatively. We make sure that we advocate for your benefit. We do a lot of business development at the Texas Blockchain Council. I'm also a Texas State representative, so I have an office at that beautiful building down the road. And I have spent most of my career working on really technical bills. This last session, I was the House author of the Texas Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Bill that was signed into law, and have been super involved in helping in technology and digital assets for the last 14 years. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining. And Giovanni, I want to start with you here. I think the sort of key piece of legislation or key sort of policy background that I want to start with today is Senate Bill 6, which passed last year at the end of June. And we were talking about that last year when I was here, and so great to see that move through. But I'm curious on the key details of that piece of legislation, important things maybe for the room to know here. And I think, to kind of kick off the AI undertone here, do you think that bill looks any different than it would have if like AI wasn't necessarily on the horizon when that was being drafted?
Sure. Well, so just a little bit of a refresher. So we file, as legislators, we file bills about the House and the Senate. Obviously, if it starts with an S, that's the Senate, H is House. We hit just over 8,000 bills that were filed in the last session. And the first 20 from each side are priority bills. So Senate bills 1 through 20 are priorities of the Senate, House Bill 1 through 20 on the House side, so just off the bat, that Senate Bill 6 was a priority of the Senate and ultimately did pass. It changed almost immediately after being filed, right? So it went through a lot of work. There was a lot of stakeholders that were involved in that process. And ultimately, there's a lot to unpack in terms of what it was. But to answer your last question first, nobody really saw exactly how big the horizon was going to be for AI, for data centers, but also this is Texas, right? 1,300 people are moving here a day. So even for non-computational load, the energy needs and desires and the capacity has just not been there. A lot of the bill, like a lot of bills in the legislature, are law, but they always have a little line at the bottom sometimes that says, and that which is not written above goes to the agencies and it goes to the regulators. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, right? And we'll take, for instance, something as simple as a deposit, right? Like what is going to be the security deposit and how that's being done? Well, that was essentially left to the regulators, and that alone has resulted in a lot of conversations. And so the bill continues to progress, and if you've been following it as closely as we have at TBC, you know that it's changed a lot just this week in terms of how far it's gone and how far it's not. Um, I worked on and I passed this AI framework this last session, and we spent probably 6 months working on this AI bill, hearing from all these stakeholders, and we passed it. But that was before anyone was even talking about AI agents. So, you know, a lot has changed and a lot more is going to change. But the cool deal in Texas is they'll be back, and they'll be back January 12th, and sure they'll change it some more.
Will, I want to go to you next. I think one of the key components of that bill was this distinction between voluntary demand response and involuntary demand response, and that certain operations, depending on how many megawatts they're consuming, would fall under one category or the other. I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are on that as like a policy position. Like, is it the role of the state government to be saying, if you're above 75 megawatts, you need to shut down when we tell you to, or do you think that's something that should be left to the market?
This is a great question. I think there's no. I rarely say there's anything as right as a policy position. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason why we elect politicians like Gio to go discuss this is so we can have a debate about where that right purpose sits. There's always a role for a regulator in any sort of market or system. Like there's no perfect market, no perfect system. The question is always like, how far are you going to overstep it? So I think we see this best at the federal level. So we see some of the federal institutions, thinking very carefully about, well, should we be regulating the specific kind of subclause of this, or do you do the more like Trump administration approach, which is do you, push that back out and actually look at the bigger picture? So I'm not going to say there's ever a right policy option. What I do think is important is that as they go through this, there is the opportunity for comment, notice, and discussion. So Gio, obviously, Gio's in the legislature. He's making that law. He's looking for it. You have a chance to vote. You have a chance to talk to your person. The same thing happens with the regulations. You can go and write a comment period. You can go talk to them. And for me, it's less about whether the policy is seen to be correct and more about whether everyone in the process got through that and was able to input properly into the system. So, there's others here who expertise are more than me on that specific question. But I think that for sure, it's like getting it right in terms of having that debate as a collective about where we want to go is perhaps more important than coming into it with there's an A or a B right policy option.
And I'll add something to that too, just because I think the reality is when we're talking about energy, and there is a limit to what you can generate at any specific time, you get into a situation of this isn't to say whether I think it's wrong or right, but it's a reality is that they're going to have to regulate it because it is something that can impact not only the industry, but it impacts private citizens as well and other businesses, down the chain from levels of consumption. But so I think it just inevitably, when you have something that's so impactful or relevant to everybody's daily lives and how we function, that getting regulatory agencies, at the state level and even on down and is inevitable. But I also think it's something that Texas is doing. I would rather Texas be writing policy that hopefully other states would follow and the federal government would follow rather than waiting for the feds to come on and take charge of that. I'm not saying that they could to a great degree in Texas, but I would rather Texas be taking a step forward and kind of deciding what that regulation needs to look like. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, let's pull on that thread a little bit. So you're obviously, pretty boots on the ground. You're seeing a lot of these contracts and deals being made. How different do things look now versus maybe 12 to 18 months ago before like AI was really a conversation?
Yeah, that is an area where I think it has changed a lot. But I think it's not necessarily all because of SB6. I think it's some because the industry, just like we've seen in Bitcoin mining, the scale of the footprint has shrunk a lot from 5-6 years ago when I was first getting going. You needed a lot more of a footprint to do a smaller amount of megawatts. Well, that's changed dramatically. You're talking 10, 15 megawatts per acre in some cases, right? That's on the extreme side, but you can get that condensed with it. And so some of this change in what AI groups might want to look at has been due to just efficiency gains, and then a change of kind of their desired target because of the reality that there's not a ton of 200 megawatt sites available, 100 megawatt sites available that can be energized in 6 months. It just doesn't really exist anymore. And so I think SB6 has definitely played a role in changing that, but it's been for me in particular, who I work on a lot of 10 to 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 megawatts. Those I think are becoming more attractive at this point because of the speed to market, how quick you can get them energized, and the lack of having to step through a lot of the hoops that you have to go through when you meet that 75 megawatt large load threshold. So for me personally, I'm pretty happy about it because it's a lot easier for me to get some more business and attractive potential off takers for some of these sites that 12 months ago they wouldn't even blink at or wouldn't even look at. So in that regard, it's been great for me.
I love it. Okay, Giovanni. I think one thing that I'm curious about, and I obviously don't have experience with this here in Texas, but you obviously do, is how much sort of education has been done for policymakers on the difference between a Bitcoin mining site and an AI data center, right? It seems like potentially for someone who's maybe not as sophisticated on these topics, they look pretty similar, right? And Margot and Troy did a great research paper 2 years ago for BPI where they really talked about the key differences between a Bitcoin miner and an AI data center, and there are some really key differences. I'm curious, like, what's at stake in making sure that you and your colleagues really do understand those differences.
Sure. And wait till people start talking about quantum computers, right? To really make everything more complicated.
Next time.
Yeah, it would be next time, I think. And it's challenging, right? And at the Texas Blockchain Council, that's one of the things we're going to do, right? Is help educate legislators about the difference between virtual currency mining, between AI data centers, just generic legacy data centers. But in most legislators' minds, quite frankly, it is still obfuscated and confusing, right? They look at it as just a bunch of computers. And I think I'll take a step here to see what they're actually listening to is not what are the technical differences between them, what is the power differences. They're listening from their neighbors and constituents who, some cases, don't want them at all.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where we're here in Texas, and I guess I never expected that kind of pushback. But what most legislators are hearing today has been from constituents who don't want that development, who have heard, quite frankly, in a lot of cases, just incorrect facts about both, whether it's a Bitcoin miner or whether it's an AI data center that makes use a lot of water, that it uses a lot of, that is responsible for there's energy, that makes a lot of noise. And some of those things may have been true before, but they're not. And they're certainly not the case in some of these smaller sites. I'm the chairman of this Innovation and Technology Caucus, and what we're doing, and actually while I'm here, the IT caucus is out with some legislators showing them what a data center is, right, and what a miner is, and having them walk through and see the differences. I know we've done that at Riot, and some other folks around here say, this is what it is. You can touch it. See, I mean, it is unusual to see what people's reactions are until they know what it is. If you want to go a step further and say, okay, how does this affect our energy plan and that kind of stuff? It's a lot for folks to be able to understand. There are definitely legislators in several key committees that do know those differences. But my worry is that people have commingled all of this conversation into one, and it's become now, quite frankly, a national conversation, and maybe even in some cases a partisan conversation, which it should not be at all.
Can I just add to that? Because I definitely think it's accurate to say that education and understanding is important, but I worry sometimes. I hear a lot from going to Bitcoin Vegas, for example. There's a lot of talk around if they only knew properly what we did, it would all be different. I think sometimes that approach can be good to begin with, but eventually you have to win the political argument, which is more aggressive than simply educating and hoping. And that is also sometimes getting somebody who is going to be opposed to what you're doing to say, not just no, but like I'll stay out of it. Getting someone to neutral sometimes is as good as getting someone to yes. And when it comes to data centers, I think it's, it doesn't have to be an understanding thing. As Gio was saying, I think the poll out last week was 7 in 10, Americans are, concerned about AI. I think that there are forces coming down on the Bitcoin mining industry that are uncontrollable around that, understandably. So, for example, like the constant sort of like doom loop you hear from, some of the AI companies around, well, our product can actually end this, or it's going to like create new vulnerabilities. Yeah, that's great for investors, but of course, it's going to make constituents incredibly nervous about their prosperity, their jobs, their environment. You only need sort of one or two bad actors to kind of like undermine an argument. And so I wonder if it's not just the education piece, but it's also getting the right arguments to the right people. If you have a legislator who is particularly opposed to the principle of Bitcoin, for example, because they prefer, a dollar, which is a legitimate argument, okay, maybe need to run the energy play with them. They'll be more open to that if you explain the benefits for communities, the benefits for their grids. And just, I think, yeah, education is one point, but you have to be more aggressive with some of those arguments. Has to be more aggressive with winning those arguments, not just hoping that they'll come around to it.
Sure. Yeah, and part of your question, I guess I want to add to this question too. So, um, understanding the difference in basically megawatts, right? An AI megawatt is not equivalent to a Bitcoin megawatt. We know that. Most people here understand that. But do you think the legislature knows that?
Most of the legislature that's not focused on this is not. But I'll also say, and maybe, well, I'm not running again, so this will be fine for me to say, but I have voted 16,000 times, and I can't tell you I knew everything about everything I voted for, right? A lot of times we have to rely on each other who are experts in this. I mean, quite frankly, when it came to technology, people would ask me, Gio, should I vote for this? Should I not vote for this? When it comes to healthcare questions, I happen to have as my desk mate a brain surgeon. I'm going to trust and lean on him. And so sometimes, no, I mean, almost always, the answer is no, you don't. The question is, do you have to? And that is why we do lead a lot to the regulators lady to go that has the staff that has that information. But what I want to, I guess, reinforce is that today they're never going to ask, what is the different type of undulation in an AI load versus a Bitcoin mining load. Their question is, why does this HOA starting a petition to tell me not to vote for it at all, wanting me to shut it down? And so I may never get to that technical question.
So basically, the public education is still probably just as important, if not more important, than getting the legislature educated. Yeah.
I'm going to do what my voters say. And what I think, and so at TBC, just, I mean, whatever, a plug is we're out doing that, right? We're trying to educate people. I'm going to a chamber tomorrow to talk to people, right, who vote and who care or not those elections. Hey, here's the economic development benefits. Here's those issues that matter. But a lot more of the folks who want to do the development, yourselves included, have to help with the education too. I mean, this can't be like 50 people hoping to change 31 million people's minds.
And just, sorry, this is a good level of kind of thing to get into. I think there's other two things.
No, please keep going.
It's also worth considering, like, when you're making policy, right, you also you're thinking about sort of system-wide changes. Like, you're trying to regulate or legislate or create a framework around a huge thing going across here. And as Gio says, like, you have to vote on healthcare today, defense tomorrow, whatever. Sometimes you have to have those abstract kind of compilation because it's going to get too complicated and too much into the weeds, which is why regulators are important. So yeah, I think there is just that to be aware of. And that's also, on the second point, is why I'd love that community panel earlier, because I think that often when you're setting up a mine, to my mind at least, you should be thinking exactly about the economics of a deal, what's going to look like in 10 years' time. But you should be doing due diligence on, like, what's that community, how they've been treated, what am I walking into, what's the sort of time and effort and, frankly, money I'm going to put in to, like, have those good relationships, and how am I going to actively manage that? Because if you don't do that with your community, they're going to talk to their local rep, they're going to talk to their congressperson. If you're not engaging with a congressperson or your local rep, they are not going to know, they can't preempt some of that stuff. And ultimately, you're going to, I think a lot of the answer here is building small coalitions step by step on the ground. and leaving some of the kind of noise and the Twitter and all of it to like another level. But like, do what you can do in your area, and that will compound over time into being a big win.
I completely agree. I have dealt with that this morning. Actually, is trying to build a little bit of a coalition with, an issue we're dealing with in the ETJ zone of a city, and that is part of the analysis is that what we're having to do is looking at what the future development of not only this particular tract of land, but the city and the county level, and what is coming down the road for them. So, yeah, I mean, building coalitions and just basically working with your local governments is very important. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm just trying to keep an eye on the clock here.
No, I know.
I do want to hit on this last point, which is, I think right now one of the things that we're looking at a lot at BPI is this sort of AI race with China, right? I think it's sort of common knowledge at this point, and I think our view at BPI is America should win that, and that would be good for not only the United States but for the world. I have this stat here that China added more capacity since 2021 than the United States has added in our entire history. And they have about 3 times the total capacity on their grid than we do. I'm curious, and you mentioned this earlier, that there's a lack of sites here, and it seems pretty obvious that energy is the bottleneck here. Um, I'm curious, if you're both on the industry side and on the policy side, what are the things that we need to do to win? Because it seems like getting the energy question right is really the key issue.
Yeah, man, that's a good one.
Thank you.
Because I do actually think there's a lot of generation available, and this would go back to the regulation issues. I mean, China has the ability to do whatever they want to do when they want to do it. We don't have that luxury, and like I was saying earlier, when you start impacting industry starts impacting constituent level resources, then there's going to be regulation that comes in. And part of this is probably why they talk about the AI aspect as like a national security issue. I would argue that Bitcoin also is a national security issue. Um, so yeah, I do think, and it goes back to what I was just saying about a megawatt not being a megawatt, the equivalent to necessarily, is that we as a not only state but as a country need to recognize the importance level of this and take steps to remove some of the hoops that are drawn out due to putting an overall arching regulatory concept on things that are not one for ones. And I think with SB6 and with some of the other regulations that are going on around the country, we're going to see a lot of things go behind the meter, off grid, finding ways to avoid the issue that comes with being on grid and tying a resource up that is impacting all of us and people who don't care about it the way we do, is probably going to be the way to us competing with China on this stuff going forward.
Yeah, I mean, just on the China point, I think that it's an amazing stat. And one of the reasons they can do it, as you say, is because they can do what they want, and they have companies as state-owned enterprises who will just go and build that. And I think that is also important to keep in mind when we're talking about the US response. Understandably, lawmakers and policymakers are thinking carefully about national security risks. If you're buying equipment from China and you are putting them on grid sensitive or near grid sensitive equipment, my first question, if I was advising a lawmaker, would be like, how do we know it's safe? How do you know where it's come from? How can you prove that? What's in that box? And so Bitcoin is an important node for the grid. We know that. But if you can't tell me it's actually going to curtail because I don't know what's in that box, I'm suddenly quite suspicious and not trustworthy. If you're telling me I should put that next to my AI compute, and you're telling me it should be around that area, and at the same time we know there is like mass attempts to steal various AI training data, I'm going to be asking questions about that. So I think that we've seen it. We've seen it in Congress. Senators Lamas and Cassidy. Lamas, of course, is just the biggest friend to the industry, but she's introduced a bill that would provide certain federal incentives, so loan guarantees, stuff like that, to miners who would start to move away from Chinese kind of like owned, operated, originated, or even associated like equipment providers. That's a pressure we're only going to see increase, whether it's the Dems, if the Dems get in this year, or whether the Republicans stay. And we saw it just in Texas recently. Like, they had a hearing, and they were asking those same questions about how we're keeping the grid secure. So I think that partly to get that same success will be a successful framework that can manage those understandable concerns, equipment providers coming out and offering that, and also operators, frankly, seeing ahead and helping policymakers get to that yes. Like, if you can't answer those questions right now, that you will get regulated in a way you don't like. So being more proactive, thinking through your supply chain, and just buying equipment that's safe, secure, and verifiable.
That was the best undercover plug I've ever heard for Falcon Pro.
Okay, fantastic. Last question for you,
Sure,
Giovanni, here.
I-
We're obviously here in Texas right now, and Texas has really been the leader on Bitcoin mining and is probably going to be the leader on AI as well. To what extent should should Texas be working with the federal government in this sort of national security view of both Bitcoin mining and AI compute?
Sure. So back a little bit to the energy in us versus China. I mean, the battle is real. During Winter Storm Uri, we had a lot of conversations here about, okay, are we still going to do wind? Are we still going to do solar? The answer is, at least in Texas, we have to do all of it, right? It's wind, it's solar, it's natural gas, it's coal, it's nuclear, right? In order for us to be able to go and get to where we need to, we've got to start working on fusion, right? I mean, the demand for power is never going to end. I don't want us to forget that the reason we've stayed ahead is because we do lead in technology, right? And that means continuing to have an incredible workforce in tier one universities that are able to go and get smart people, because I think that is our competitive edge. Our third edge, I would say, is our form of government, right? A lot of people will say, well, there's so many regulations in the US. Well, I'd make the case that China has quite a few rules too, right? Just try and get on the internet, right? So we do have our freedom of expression, and our ability to do those things does also give us an incredible edge. And so oftentimes, it does make sense for us to come up with listening to our folks and coming up with rules. And this really came up a lot with artificial intelligence, right? So I worked on, for a long time, a framework to help provide great guardrails for both public sector and private sector artificial intelligence use, right? And there was a lot of pushback on that. In fact, as soon as I passed it, the federal government wanted to do an AI moratorium, right? Like, we're going to say states have no say. But if you have watched the federal government at all, you are probably realize that they're not going to get much done. And that's probably been true for the past 20 years, right? I mean, I passed more bills last session than they passed last year, all of them. Okay. And so the states have an incredible ability to work on those, to listen to their constituents and move forward. And I think that's one of the benefits that Texas has. A lot of people say, well, there's all these different rules, and you should let the federal government go and work on this kind of stuff. Well, I would point to the 10th Amendment. Okay, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Whatever the federal government can't get done, it does go to the states. And I think the states have shown the ability to lead and to innovate. And some states can't, and they're California. But those other states are Texas, and that's capitalism in a government form.
I love it.